All the congratulations should go to President Trump. He has a fine relationship with President Xi. The mood in the room was one of great respect, but also between two men who knew each other quite well and knew what they were getting into. I think at the end of the day, just this trip alone may end up in $2 trillion of investment.
How about that? One of the many headlines that the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent gave to Maria Bartiromo earlier today on Fox Business. This on the heels of the summit in South Korea. He calls the outcome lucrative. Maria B. joins me now. Good morning to you. Checking the markets right now. We're trading lower. I'll get that in a second because I want to talk about interest rates. But first things first, Maria. You made a ton of headlines, 30, 40 minutes with Scott Bessent. I'll watch the entire thing. Before I hear the list of headlines, here is President Xi reading from his statement inside that meeting with the president in South Korea.
Given our different national conditions, we do not always see eye to eye with each other. And it is normal for the two leading economies of the world to have frictions now and then. And in the face of winds, waves, and challenges, you and I, at the helm of China-US relations, should stay the right course and ensure the steady sailing forward of the giant ship of China-US relations.
So it seems like this relationship continues to grow. That's quite clear now. He'll be in China in April of next year, 2026. Go ahead. The president scored it at 12 on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah, that's right.
What did Scott Bessent tell you were the major headlines from this meeting?
Well, the major headlines was the agreement, and I've got a couple of important items in that agreement, which really was not the focus, but I think are very substantial. Scott Bessent told me that this was an opportunity to reset the relationship between the U.S. and China. Of course, as you mentioned, President Trump is lowering his tariff on China to 47%. That's down from 57%. Remember, a month ago, the president had threatened a 100% additional tariff, which would have taken the tariff to 157%. The president told me in my interview 2 weeks ago that that was not sustainable. And of course, even before they walked in the room, that was off the table as well. So what are the details here? Number one, the U.S. cuts the tariff to 47%. China will buy a massive amount of agriculture. Scott Bessent said that they are going to be buying 12 million metric tons of soybeans during the season overall. They're going to be starting that immediately and going into January. So the agriculture part of this is very important. Also important is the fact that the U.S. is going to pull back on its entity list. They are suspending this new rule that had gone into effect, which expands the entity list of Chinese companies. In other words, when you're on a U.S. entity list, that will limit the opportunity to sell things into China. And there are a number of technology companies that got caught up in that list, Chinese companies that trade on U.S. exchanges. That entity list is going to be, and the expansion of that entity list is going to be suspended for a year. It's all 1 year suspension. The export controls that China was threatening to put on rare earth minerals, that's going to be suspended for a year. And you have an opportunity here to look at real trade, fair trade between the two nations. And I think that was the headline, the fact that China's going to be buying more agriculture. The U.S. is going to suspend these new rules, which would have expanded the entity list as well. The Chinese are going to be pulling back on that export control threat. That was really important, Bill, because we need those rare earth mining refined, and it largely happens in China. There are a lot of rare earth minerals across the world. We have them in the U.S. as well, but the refining of those minerals happens in China, and they were going to put export controls on that. They will pause that decision for 1 year, Bill.
Okay, so on the fentanyl, trust but verify, right? And we're going to have to see whether or not those levels drop. On the Fed, they cut a quarter point yesterday. Stocks are lower today. I think that has more to do with earnings season. Some of the Meta came in and they talked about how many billions of dollars they're losing and some of the R&D they're doing. But Jerome Powell does not seem inclined to continue cutting rates. What was your read on what he said yesterday?
Well, look, it was no surprise that the Fed cut rates again 25 basis points. And it's also no surprise that the Fed is keeping to this idea that, well, don't expect a whole string of rate cuts. Make no mistake, if the economy is looking to be weakening, and we have had a lot of companies come out and announce layoffs recently, Amazon, UPS, others. So if that is the case in December, they will cut interest rates again. But even more important here was also in my interview with Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary told me that they're doing a second round of interviews for the chairman of the Fed job. Scott Bessent narrowed it down to 5 individuals, and he said he's doing a second round of interviews, and he will have the name likely. He's going to present those to the president, and he will probably have the person who's going to be the new chairman of the Federal Reserve by the end of the year, by December. The current Fed makeup, they're divided. You know, you had 2 dissenters. Of course, Stephen Myron, who is a Trump pick, wanted a 50 basis point cut. They did 25, so he was a dissenter. And then there was one other who actually wanted no cut at all. But I would expect that we are going to see continued cuts in interest rates, and certainly going into the new year when President Trump installs a new chairman, I would expect that we would also see further lowered rates, especially if we see an economy that is weakening. We don't have data, Bill.
Yeah.
Government is shut down. We're really not sure what's going on. Scott Bessent assessed the economy as very strong, particularly given that the president is talking about $17 trillion of new investment into America. But we'll have to see about these layoffs and what that means for the macro story.
We are pilots flying through a cloud. Hey, good work, Maria. And good stuff there with Bessent. Thanks for coming on. We'll talk real soon.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, you bet.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.